When Blade was introduced to Honkai Star Rail back in 1.2, he was a very hyped-up character, at least in my eyes. The very ominous cutscene of him being interrogated and his involvement with Danheng and the Xianzhou as a whole, not to mention how he's the ultimate edgelord of this universe, gave off a very commanding impression. And the same held true for him in-game. Upon playable release, we were given the first damage dealer who could truly contend with the likes of Seela to an extent, as he was the first featured 5-star destruction unit to enter Star Rail, and a very appealing one right from the get-go owing to his ease of use and great damage output for that time. While the first couple of versions of his release saw fairly widespread usage, Blade has fallen off steadily and significantly in presence, becoming one of the least played characters among the featured 5-stars in both Memory of Chaos and Pure Fiction. Obviously, there are still people out there who use him, but I think it's safe to say this guy's been dealt a losing hand from the start. So for today's episode of Why No One Plays, we'll be discussing the Stellaron Hunter Blade and why he's been struggling as of late. Like with many units in Honkai Star Rail, character appeal contributes heavily to popularity. I would say arguably more so than Genshin, due in part to Star Rail being a turn-based game and therefore having less player input from a mechanical standpoint. Of course, when it comes down to it, practical strength takes precedence in a game with as linear of a combat structure as Star Rail. That being said, there's a reason so many players chose to skip Argenti despite him being a fairly powerful character in his own right. He sorta just came out of nowhere and didn't really stick around for all that long. The Stellaron Hunters have been consummate fan favorites among the community, especially with their latest member Firefly gracing us with their adorableness in Penaconi's story. And with their unorthodox ways of approaching combat, they've proven to be quite valuable to have on your team, a trait that's only grown more pronounced over time. Of the 4 hunters, Blade's unquestionably the most straightforward character, and that actually works to his disadvantage. Star Rail has managed to create a serviceably diverse cast in spite of how overly simplistic the game's combat is, but that didn't stop units like Blade from getting pushed down for having very honest gameplay, which I think is both his greatest strength and weakness. His main selling points how easy he is to understand and use, requiring almost no external aid to get started by virtue of his self-contained moveset. At a surface glance, Blade had all of the makings of a unit with incredible future growth and potential. He still does. During a time when SP economy was a hot topic, Blade stood out for only requiring 1 SP every 3 turns, making him the most SP efficient unit in relation to the other damage dealers we had available back then. I understand the competition wasn't really that stacked at the time, but it was still important to mention. His unique HP scaling also made him a deceptively sturdy character as well, being able to withstand far more punishment than anyone else at the time, even with his own HP consumption. If he stacked up his ultimate before using it, the damage was absolutely staggering. Best of all, he had 3 powerful damaging abilities that could strike multiple targets: his empowered basic attack, his ultimate, and his talent. While in the eyes of most theory crafters, Blade fell short of Seela in maximum DPS potential, he made up for it with a strong floor, self-sustainability, economical SP consumption, autopilot-friendly playstyle, and giving you a reason to hold on to HP main stat relics. All of these traits would have you believe he was a good fit for any kind of combat scenario, whether bosses or groups of enemies. And he was, for a time. But like I said, Blade's stability is also what ended up hurting him as time went on, while at the same time suffering from horrible circumstantial luck, as in he was unintentionally screwed over in every which way possible. Not even one version after him came Lunai Danheng, a fellow destruction unit who paid a far steeper cost in SP but could utterly eclipse Blade's damage given the right team. Lunai Danheng's phenomenal ceiling is what allows him to stay relevant as one of the best DPS units to this day. Even back in 1.3, he was more than a match for Blade in this department. As if that wasn't competition enough, Jingliu was released in version 1.4, taking the notion of easy and consistent to use to an entire new level. She's equally as SP efficient as Blade, but has more on-demand burst potential from everything within a toolkit being within the player's agency to control. On top of that, her scaling's just higher all across the board on an individual-to-individual basis. Bluntly speaking, if we cast aside differences in element, Jingliu straight up powercrafts Blade in every sense of the word. Hypothetically, if Blade had a power range of 100 to 120, Jingliu's was 110 to 130, a net positive over Blade in almost every way. One advantage Blade has over Lunai Danheng and Jingliu is that he possesses a follow-up attack, which, as you may recall for those who saw my follow-up video, can give a character theoretically limitless damage per cycle if you can repeatedly meet the activation requirements for it. The problem is, the activation condition for Shuhu's gift is extremely specific, which extends to the rest of his moveset. Blade is to this day the only HP scaling attacker in the game. We have supports like Huohua and Fushuan who can deal damage based on HP, but obviously they're supports, not attackers. On its own, HP scaling is fine if you have the right accommodations for it, but sadly we don't. Off the top of my head, the only 2 units who can boost max health are Lynx and Fushuan, but Fushuan's an interesting case in that you don't want to pair the 2 considering you want Blade to take damage in light of his ultimate. As for Lynx, we'll talk about her a bit later. With version 2 bringing a ton of unique playstyles, from damage over time to follow-up attacks to nihility to break teams, support's been given for everything except HP scaling. Blade has excellent damage potential, but for him to access that potential he needs a team who can back him up, and at the moment he really doesn't have a specialized team. It's like Eula and Ito and Genshin, they have the power but they don't have the people. Likewise, Blade was designed in such a specific way that he has a tough time capitalizing on supports who would otherwise be excellent facilitators of hypercarry teams. For example, Tingyu is the poster child of a hypercarry support. She can amplify her carry's DPS potential through attack and damage boosting, along with the rate of ultimate usage. What makes her incompatible with Blade is that 1. While Blade does have a modicum of attack scaling in his kit, it's quite low relative to his HP scaling, so the massive attack boost from Tingyu is practically wasted on him. 2. Blade's ultimate's weird in that it has 2 charge mechanics, first being the energy cost and the second being the HP storage. You can use Death Sentence without fully capping the HP loss, but that HP loss is where the real oomph comes in. It caps at 90% of his max health, which means his ultimate can do 190% of his HP in damage instead of 100, almost double what it could do. So Tingyun's battery does help, but what he really cares about more than energy is people who can, and I'm not even joking, help him kill himself. That's one example. I already mentioned how Vushun's max health boost would be helpful to him, but it gets cancelled out by her cover tanking for him, thus preventing him from killing himself. YouTube, I swear, please don't demonetize me. I'm talking about a video game character, not a real person, no matter how much Hoyoverse players gaslight themselves into thinking their waifus are real. Blade's unique mechanics pretty much disqualify him from taking advantage of the majority of the support roster to the fullest. One of his best supports is Bronya, who can turn advance him and boost his crit and regular damage, 2 things he can make use of. You would think that Sparkle, who is by many accounts better than Bronya, would therefore have been a good choice for Blade. And technically she is, but while Sparkle gives a team more SP than they realistically know what to do with, it comes with the stipulation that a team has to use that SP, as their full damage augmentation is based on how many skill points your team consumes. Blade is very SP efficient in that he only consumes 1 skill point every 3 turns. This makes him incompatible with Sparkle though, since he can only use 1 skill point every 3 turns, therefore never being able to get her full damage boost on his own, so he can't use her either. Blade's also unable to synergize with Aventurine or any tank for that matter, as that prevents him from taking damage. Essentially, Blade is the opposite of Yanqing. Yanqing wants to avoid taking damage whatsoever, while Blade wants to avoid not taking damage. So despite being a very easy character to understand, he goes about combat in such an unconventional way that supports have to pragmatically be made intentionally to support him for them to be efficient. Even Robin, who is almost on par with Ranmei in terms of universal supportive capability, is suboptimal for Blade. She can spiff up his follow-up attack DPS, but not only is her ultimate's attack boost wasted on Blade, but it's also difficult to sync up his follow-up attack to trigger multiple times over the course of her ultimate, whereas Ratio, Aventurine, and Topaz can turbo spam their follow-ups without even trying. Point being, damage dealers in Starl have kept up in relevance not by their own merit, but by how compatible they are with new supports. Jingyuan's matured in value over time thanks to units like Huohuo and especially Sparkle indirectly buffing him to high heaven. Same for Seela, whose mono-quantum team serves as a lifeline that keeps her relevant in spite of Starl's increasing power creep. Kafka received an astronomical buff through Black Swan. Luna Danhang got Sparkle, Ratio got Aventurine, and Robin. Everyone effectively received some kind of buff with the advent of new characters, except Blade. Blade missed out on all of that because of how awkwardly specialized he is, putting him in a weird limbo state where there's always something holding him back from being an optimal choice in just about everything. Starting with MLC, as you know, MLC heavily incentivizes front-loaded pressure, units who can access their power spikes quickly and commence with the ass whooping. Blade's more of a mid-loaded / back-loaded damage dealer. Death Sentence requires you to store damage taken, and at the moment, it's impossible to pull this off on demand as you can't attack your own teammates, you have to wait for enemies to attack you. Therein lies another problem. Why would you want to play a character who has to take damage from enemies? That runs the risk of him accidentally dying if you're not careful, which is why it's almost obligatory for him to be paired with Luocha, who can restore and cleanse him in a pinch while supplementing his HP cost with the Abyss Field, or Lynx, who can continuously heal. Stand by for more on Lynx, I'm getting to her. Regardless, Blade's max burst combo requires you to first have him sustain enough damage to fully prime his ultimate, and second, lose HP 5 times to cast his talent. In fairness, his follow-up attack will trigger fairly consistently, but the point is, there are properties in his toolkit that hamstring his ability to strike hard, and most critically, fast. He needs time. Of course, if you only care about getting the rewards and not the score, then he most certainly can do that, but in terms of 0 cycle or even 1 cycle clears, he struggles a lot. Next up is Pure Fiction. Blade has fairly decent AoE coverage, and he also is very well equipped for tests of endurance, as he can consistently maintain his empowered basic attack. However, once again, speed is the name of the game in PF. The reason Herda and Himeko are so obnoxiously overpowered is that they can attack multiple times per turn cycle, thus enabling them to clear wave after wave in record time. Blade also has the potential to do this, but as mentioned before, his talent's predicated more on quality not quantity, even though quantity is more integral in PF. If perhaps all 3 of his teammates could repeatedly drain his HP, he could realistically set off his talent every turn or perhaps more often, but currently there's no way to do this. One possible avenue of escape for Blade is that usually whenever a new wave spawns, enemies get to attack first, giving him more stacks of his talent. However, Blade lacks a taunt, so unless all enemies have AoE attacks, you have to pray that they go after him. With this in mind, some of you may ask, what about Lynx? She gives Blade max health and a taunt. That's true, but even though her skill looks like it was practically made for him, the absence of on-demand cleansing actually makes her less safe to use than Luocha or Huohuo. Blade does want to get attacked, yes, but he also wants to avoid getting crowd controlled, and unless you have Lynx's ultimate on speed dial, it's a very risky gamble to take. Overall, it's still fairly difficult to use him efficiently in PF when there are so many other more brainless options. Argenti, Clara, Jingyuan, Herda, Akron, Himiko, Kafka, Black Swan, Blade would not even be your 8th choice, let alone your 1st. Then finally, Apocalyptic Shadow. Boss battles are usually single target. With this first Eidolon, he can deal fairly significant damage to isolated targets, but he's conceptually not meant to be a solo burst attacker, he's a generalist. I'm guessing just like PF and MOC, time will be of the essence in this environment too, putting Blade at a disadvantage in all 3 endgame modes, at least in his current position. All in all, Blade's been getting hammered in every way possible, despite being one of the only wind units in the game. Historically, there haven't been that many MOCs and PFs that revolve around wind weakness, and almost every time there was, the cycle blessings of favor damage over time like Black Swan, or units like Akron who can just ignore weakness types and brute force their way through everything. Do not be mistaken though, Blade is not a lost cause, far from it. He can get significantly buffed if Starl can help him out in 2 ways. 1. Make more units who can train his HP. Presently, only Jingliu can siphon health from her team. If Blade gets more supports who consume his HP, that will lead to not only faster procs of his talent, but more HP storage on his ultimate. And then, if we get more units who can boost max health without being counterproductive elsewhere, that will also be a good way to help him out in the long term. Finally, since Blade's follow-up attack houses a fairly major chunk of his pressure, as the follow-up engine continues to expand and develop, Blade can and will partake in some of that growth. So basically, we need more HP supports. We need a Lynx who can apply the taunt to max HP increase, but also maybe have more damage buffs or accessible cleansing. We need supports who can train his HP to accelerate his talent's activation rate, and ideally have those same units primarily focused on buffing. You were able to use Blade and Jingliu together by having the former utilize the latter's party HP consumption, but that's a coincidental side effect, not an intentional synergy. I think for Blade, some way to help him attack more frequently would be good, so a support who can turn advance him in exchange for HP or something. Honestly, there are so many ways to enhance Blade's performance, it's just through terrible luck that not a single unit has managed to efficiently meet his demands. I think Blade's a good example of how being too niche can work against you in a turn-based game. It's good to have a unique playstyle, but you don't want to alienate yourself from the overall meta. As it stands, he's stuck in the middle of everything. He has good single target damage, but not good enough, and he has good AoE coverage, but not the kind of AoE coverage that makes him excel in pure fiction. If in the future they decide to expand more on HP scalers, that will be his ticket to return back to form. However, that presents another possible issue where if they do create HP supports, they might introduce more HP scaling attackers as well, all of whom will more likely than not take better advantage of those HP mechanics than Blade. Just to reiterate, he's by no means unviable. Blade's still a very comfy character and can still get stuff done, but in terms of pull and deployment value, he really has gotten screwed over in every which way possible. There is still plenty of hope for him, but it will come down to how Hoyoverse plays it out. What do you guys think though? Do you agree with my points on Blade, or do you think there's something else I forgot to mention about him? Feel free to share it down in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why No One Plays episodes for Honkai Star Rail if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.